You ever meet someone so drunk on power, you'd swear they were auditioning for a role in a political thriller instead of managing an HOA? That was Clarissa Danvers. Not a mayor, not a judge, not even a city clerk. Just a woman with a newsletter, a clipboard, and a dream of total neighborhood domination. She wasn't elected. She declared herself Queen of Brookmere Gardens, a gated community where the lawns were identical, the shutters came in only 3 shades of beige, and freedom of expression had to be HOA approved. And for 5 long years, I lived under her petty, tyrannical rule. My name's Madeline Ross. I'm a 42-year-old logistics coordinator, which means I'm not exactly the type to fly off the handle or make impulsive choices. I plan, I track, I evaluate risk. But Clarissa? She was the kind of woman who could turn a hanging flower pot into a federal case. The final straw? Not the time she fined me for seasonal non-compliance because my autumn wreath had too much orange. Not even the time she marched across my yard with a measuring tape because my garden gnome was 3 inches too tall. No, it was when she issued a formal violation because my front door, a tasteful, vibrant teal, disrupted the architectural harmony of Brookmere. That's when I realized this wasn't a neighborhood, it was a prison in pastel colors. So I did what any over-regulated, soul-weary woman would do. I sold my beige box, packed up my things, and bought a little slice of heaven just outside her reach. 3 acres of ungoverned bliss, 2 miles down the county road, a little creek, a few towering oaks, wildflowers that didn't ask permission to bloom, and best of all, no Clarissa. I traded in my HOA-mandated shrubbery for a garden that followed the whims of the wind. The day I moved in, I rolled out my teal welcome mat like a flag of victory. I was finally free, or so I thought. Moving day was a blur of boxes and promise. The new house smelled like opportunity and a touch of cedar. I was overseeing the movers, humming to myself when I saw it, gleaming under the afternoon sun like a chrome-coated omen. Clarissa's silver SUV. I froze. There it was, idling slowly along the county road, her tinted window rolled halfway down, her head swiveling just enough to take in every detail. The unpacked boxes on the porch, the slightly overgrown grass, and that audacious teal mat grinning at her like a dare. Her sunglasses, some knockoff brand with fake gold flaking off the edges, shielded her eyes, but not her intent. She didn't wave, didn't speak, just kept driving past with the precision of a military drone and the spite of a woman who just watched her kingdom shrink by 3 acres. At first, I told myself maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe she was lost, though the idea of Clarissa not knowing every street within a 10-mile radius was laughable. The woman had a 6th sense for violations. If your trash bins were a foot too close to the curb, she'd sense it like a hawk spotting a mouse. So no, it wasn't a coincidence. She was scouting, testing the air, measuring the distance between her crumbling kingdom and my freshly claimed frontier. 2 days later, her presence was no longer a silent threat. I was planting roses in front of the porch, dirt on my jeans and joy in my heart, when I heard the mechanical whir of a window descending. Clarissa's voice poured out like molasses left in the sun. "Enjoying the rustic charm, Maddie? Quite the departure from Brookmere standards." I didn't flinch, didn't pause my planting. "That's the point, Clarissa," I said calmly. Her lips curled into the kind of smile that never touched her eyes, the kind that threatened more than it welcomed. Indeed, she lingered for another 30 seconds, her SUV humming softly, as if daring me to react. I didn't. And then she drove off, but not before giving my freshly planted roses a once-over like they'd personally insulted her HOA bylaws. I'd love to say I brushed it off completely, but the truth is that single encounter planted something far more troubling than the roses ever could. Doubt. I started to wonder if maybe I hadn't escaped after all. Maybe I'd only made the mistake of assuming the borders of her power were defined by the wrought iron gates of Brookmere. What I didn't realize was that for Clarissa Danvers, those gates were just suggestions. Her reach. It extended as far as her silver SUV would take her, and as I was about to find out, she wasn't done with me. Not even close. 3 days after Clarissa's drive-by insult, I thought maybe, just maybe, she had gotten it out of her system. Perhaps it was a farewell patrol, One last glare from the turret of her HOA fortress before she retreated to torment other unsuspecting residents of Brookmere. But that was wishful thinking, and deep down I knew better. Clarissa wasn't the type to surrender territory. She was the type to regroup and come back swinging with a different weapon, subtlety. And that's exactly what she did. It started with a flyer. On a misty Thursday morning, I opened my front door to find a trifold piece of glossy paper tucked beneath the edge of my mailbox. At first glance, it looked like any other landscaping promotion, generic name, promises of seasonal excellence, and a phone number in an all-too-familiar Brookmere area code. But what really caught my eye was the second sheet behind it. A formal memo printed on Brookmere Gardens HOA letterhead, yes, the same HOA I no longer belong to, paper-clipped to the flyer like a silent threat. The note was brief and so perfectly passive-aggressive it could have been framed. While Brookmere standards do not officially apply beyond the community's borders, it began, we encourage all former and adjacent residents to uphold the visual harmony that benefits collective property values. Overgrown lawns and garish displays, while not prohibited, are certainly discouraged. It was signed, of course, by Clarissa Danvers, President, Brookmere Gardens Architectural Standards Committee. The audacity of it stunned me. She had driven to my home, trespassed onto my property, and left behind a veiled warning disguised as helpful advice, all while pretending to be a concerned neighbor. That was the moment I stopped doubting myself. Clarissa hadn't let go. If anything, she had escalated. This was psychological warfare, and it was only just beginning. I slipped the flyer and memo into a drawer in my office and labeled the folder Evidence. That same day, her silver SUV returned. It didn't park, didn't honk, didn't do anything overt. It simply cruised by at a crawl, just slow enough to catch a good look at my garden, my unmanicured hedge, and the bright orange wind chime I'd hung from the porch rafter. It was like being watched by a predator who hadn't decided when to pounce. By the following week, the pattern became clear. Every morning around 10, and again near sunset, the silver SUV would appear. She'd park just a hair's breadth off my property line, close enough to observe, but not close enough to be accused of anything unlawful. Some days, she didn't even pretend to be casual about it. I'd see her jotting in a notebook, head tilted like an appraiser inspecting damage. Other times, she just sat motionless, sunglasses on, arms folded, projecting judgment like it was a physical force. I tried ignoring it. I tried chalking it up to boredom or curiosity or some twisted retirement hobby. But the knot in my stomach told me this wasn't just curiosity, it was a campaign. A week later, I was in the front yard digging rows for my new vegetable garden, something I'd always wanted to try but never could under Brookmere's sterile landscaping code. I was feeling proud, sweaty and content, planting tomatoes with the soft hum of bees nearby when I heard that all-too-familiar engine. Clarissa was there, standing behind my split-rail fence like some suburban ghost haunting her own past. She didn't even greet me, just stood with her notepad, nose in the air, eyes scanning the tilled earth like it was a crime scene. "You do realize," she said finally, her voice like vinegar through a smile, "that disturbing soil like this attracts pests, rats, raccoons, all sorts of things that don't respect boundaries." I stood up slowly, wiping my muddy hands on my jeans. "This is my land, Clarissa. Your rules don't apply here. My tomatoes, my soil, none of your business." Her expression didn't change. "Some standards transcend geography, Madeline. Some boundaries are moral." I nearly laughed. This from the woman who once fined a Brookmere family for letting their child draw chalk hearts on the sidewalk. This from the woman who tried to regulate the font size of holiday decorations. After that, I took things seriously. My professional instincts kicked in. I started documenting everything, dates, times, sightings. I wrote down every instance she drove by, every look, every remark, every strange visitor. I didn't know exactly what I'd do with the information yet, but I knew I'd need it. Clarissa was smart, conniving really. She knew how to walk the razor edge of legality without falling over, but I also knew that no one could balance on that edge forever. Things escalated again when she started involving my neighbors. Mr. Lyman, a sweet old farmer whose land bordered mine to the west, came over one afternoon with a confused look on his face. "Some woman in a shiny SUV stopped by," he said, leaning on my fence. said she was with some sort of community standards board, asked if I'd noticed any, unsightly behavior over here. I blinked, stunned. Did she say that exactly? Unsightly, he nodded. Even used the word nuisance. Asked if your grass was getting too tall, if your compost smelled off. I told her the only nuisance around here was a busybody wasting daylight. You're doing just fine, Maddie. I laughed then, but it was a bitter sound. I thanked him, genuinely grateful, but inside I burned. She was trying to poison the well, turn people against me, make me look like a threat to the tranquility of the county. A few days later, I received a formal letter, Brookmere Gardens letterhead again, this time folded crisply into a linen envelope like it was an invitation to a black-tie gala. Inside was a list of complaints written in that same saccharine tone Clarissa always used to mask her hostility. We have received reports, it read, of the following issues which may impact surrounding property values: unchecked meadow growth harboring ticks, an unapproved green mailbox, exposed gardening tools visible from the road, and bird feeders attracting aggressive avian species. We trust you will address these concerns promptly to avoid further escalation. My mouth hung open. Aggressive avian species. This woman was officially unhinged. I faxed a copy to Leo, my son. Ticks and bird crimes, he said. She's losing it, Mum. Keep logging. If she sets foot on your land or interferes, call it in. But don't confront her. She thrives on that. Let her hang herself. I knew Leo was right. Clarissa was a control addict, and addicts escalate when they can't get their fix. So I waited, watched, prepared. And then, like clockwork, she took it a step further. She started weaponizing the county. It began when a county code enforcement officer named Ms. Carter showed up on a Monday morning, clipboard in hand, looking sheepish. Got an anonymous complaint, she said, shifting uncomfortably. Supposed fire hazard. Something about dry grass and uncontained brush. I showed her around, neatly cut lawn, labelled compost bins, trimmed hedges, nothing out of place. She raised an eyebrow. This looks fine, ma'am. Some folks have creative definitions of hazard. 2 days later, a white truck from Animal Control pulled up my drive. A man named Officer Hank stepped out, apologetic from the get-go. Sorry about this, he said, seeing my ancient spaniel napping on the porch. We got a report about a feral dog colony. Honestly, we expected a different scene. He sighed and glanced at the road. Let me guess, I said. Silver SUV? He nodded. Same lady's been filing reports for months. Cats, squirrels, possums. None of it holds, but we've got to check it out. Every visit from these officials chipped away at my peace, but it also built something stronger, resolve. I kept collecting names, badge numbers, report summaries. I had no illusions about Clarissa stopping, not until she was forced to. She was testing the limits, like a toddler pushing boundaries, except this toddler wore heels and wielded bylaws like daggers. I knew she was using proxies, maybe burner phones or anonymous tips, proving it would be hard, but not impossible. I wasn't going to let her win, not on my land, not in my life. The trap was nearly set. All I needed now was for her to spring it. It was a breezy Tuesday morning when everything began to tip. The kind of morning that smelled like promise. Birds chirping, sun just peeking through the trees, and the gentle rustle of leaves reminding me why I'd moved out here in the first place. I had hired an arborist named Tom to finally trim the large oak leaning ever so slightly toward the cottage roof. His crew showed up early, polite and professional, their truck tucked neatly into my gravel drive, orange cones placed responsibly around the edge. Tom even offered to trim back some overgrown limbs at no extra cost, just because he appreciated the fresh coffee I brought out. It was the sort of peaceful, productive day I'd been craving ever since escaping the soul-crushing HOA rules of Brookmere Gardens. I was out on the porch pouring lemonade when I heard the screech of tires and a voice sharper than broken glass pierced the morning calm. This circus is a hazard, a public nuisance, a disruption of community tranquility. I looked up, and sure enough, there it was. The silver SUV, glinting like a villain's lair on wheels, parked dead center in the road. Clarissa had arrived, red-faced and brimming with self-importance, arms flailing like a traffic cop without a badge. She marched straight toward Tom, who stood blinking in his hard hat, chainsaw still humming from use. "You can't block this road. This is illegal. You're obstructing access to the neighborhood." Tom, ever the professional, replied calmly, "Ma'am, this is a county road, and the truck is well off to the side. We have permits, and we're working entirely on private property." Clarissa scoffed, as if the very idea of needing permits didn't apply to her indignation. "I am the president of Brookmere Gardens HOA," she announced as though reciting royal lineage. "I oversee community safety, and this is an unacceptable disturbance." She fumbled into her purse, pulled out her phone, and began tapping furiously. "I'm calling 911. This is a code violation, a noise complaint, and a safety hazard." I stepped down from the porch, hands steady despite the knot forming in my chest. "Clarissa, your car is the only thing blocking the road. Tom and his team are working on my land. This has nothing to do with Brookmere." She didn't even glance at me. Irrelevant. The impact of visual chaos does not stop at property lines. She pressed the phone to her ear and began rattling off accusations to the dispatcher. Unlawful construction, road obstruction, noise pollution, suspicious activity. Her voice took on a breathless drama, painting a picture of civil unrest over nothing more than tree trimming. Tom muttered under his breath, "Is this lady for real?" I gave him a small nod. "Unfortunately, yes." I took a long sip of lemonade and added, "Her idea of control doesn't recognize boundaries, not legal ones, not moral ones, not even physical ones." Clarissa continued her animated rant, circling her SUV like a peacock in combat mode until she noticed I was entirely unbothered. That seemed to agitate her even more. 15 minutes later, the distant crunch of tires on gravel signaled the arrival of the deputies. 2 squad cars pulled up. Deputies Reed and Lopez stepped out, calm and professional, taking in the scene with practiced eyes. Clarissa, as expected, rushed forward like a stage actress missing her cue. "Officers, thank God. This is completely out of control. Look at the noise, the machinery, the blocked road. This is a threat to neighborhood safety and aesthetic harmony." Deputy Reed frowned, already looking over the lay of the land. Lopez pointed at the silver SUV with a clipboard in hand. "Ma'am, is that your vehicle?" Clarissa puffed her chest. "Yes, I had to stop in the road to document the obstruction." Reed raised a brow. "Your vehicle is currently blocking traffic. We're going to need you to move it immediately." Clarissa sputtered. "But I'm the complainant," she exclaimed, incredulous. "That doesn't exempt you from the law," Reed replied calmly. While she argued semantics, Lopez turned to me. "Ma'am, can you confirm this is your property?" I nodded. "Madeline Ross, I hired this crew. All work is on my land." Lopez glanced at the permits Tom handed over, then looked back at Clarissa, who was now mid-speech about civic duty and neighborhood expectations. "Everything checks out," he said to Reed. "Truck's not obstructing anything. This is a legitimate, permitted job." Clarissa's face was beginning to flush deeper shades of red. "But the noise, the mess. Brookmere is just down the road. This affects the entire community." Her voice cracked slightly, the desperation curling at the edges of her authority. "Brookmere," I reminded her gently, "has nothing to do with this land. You don't get to decide what happens here." And then, like a scene out of poetic justice, a third vehicle rolled up, a black, unmarked SUV. Leo stepped out, crisp in his county uniform, badge gleaming on his belt. Clarissa lit up like she'd just seen a rescue helicopter. "Deputy Ross, oh, thank goodness. Please explain the standards to your mother. She's endangering everyone with this chaotic behavior." Leo didn't smile. He didn't even blink. "What's the situation, gentlemen?" he asked. Deputy Reed briefed him quickly. A false report of a blocked road, the only obstruction being the silver SUV belonging to the complainant. Leo's jaw tensed. "So, let me get this straight," he said, turning to Clarissa. "You called 911 to report vehicles obstructing a public road, but your car is the only one causing an issue." Clarissa faltered. "Well, potentially. I had to stop to document. There was an implied obstruction." Leo's voice hardened. "Filing a false report is a serious offense, Ms. Danvers." She blinked, stunned. "I am a pillar of the Brookmere community." "Not in this jurisdiction," Lopez muttered under his breath. You knowingly lied to emergency services, wasted resources, and disrupted a lawful private service. That's grounds for citation at best, arrest at worst. Clarissa's composure cracked like thin ice. This is absurd. I demand you reprimand her. She's doing nothing wrong, Leo cut in. But you, Ms. Danvers, are in direct violation of obstruction laws, and you've made a false emergency claim. You're being cited. Her hands trembled as Reed pulled out a citation pad. You can't do this, she gasped. I will sue every one of you. Be my guest, Leo replied coldly. But next time, don't misuse public resources because you don't like your ex-neighbor's gardening schedule. As the citation was issued, Clarissa stared at the paper like it was written in a foreign language. Her illusion of power was disintegrating, and she had no idea how to function without it. When she finally got back into her SUV and peeled away from the scene, a strange silence followed. Tom let out a low whistle. Some neighbor you've got there. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. You have no idea, I muttered. Leo stayed behind for a moment after the other deputies left. He didn't say much, just walked to the edge of the property, glanced around, then nodded. She crossed a line, Mom. This isn't harmless anymore. It's harassment, and if she tries this again, we won't be issuing a citation. We'll be pressing charges. I met his eyes and gave a small smile of gratitude. The weight of months, years even, of tension began to lift from my shoulders. For the first time, Clarissa had been held accountable. For the first time, she wasn't the one holding the leash. She was the one being reined in. The trap had been sprung, and the Queen of Brookmere had walked right into it, heels clicking all the way down the wrong road. The aftermath of Clarissa's roadside meltdown echoed louder than the sirens she had hoped would come to her rescue. But it wasn't the arrest itself that signaled her downfall. It was what came next. The word spread like wildfire. Within hours, the entire Brookmere grapevine was buzzing. People who'd once whispered in fear of her started talking openly. The HOA message board, usually a monument to forced politeness and artificial civility, lit up with passive-aggressive posts barely bothering to mask their glee. A certain someone may need a refresher on civic responsibility. When community service starts to mean actually serving the community, you could almost hear the champagne corks popping behind those tight smiles. Clarissa had always thrived on image, on performance, on the illusion that she was above the people she lorded over. So when news got out that she'd been handcuffed, cited and publicly corrected by not just one, but 3 deputies, including my son, her armor began to crack. Still, she didn't give up immediately. That kind of arrogance doesn't fold in one afternoon. Instead, she doubled down, at least in theory. The next morning, I received another letter, this one far less formal, scribbled in loopy cursive and dropped unceremoniously on my doorstep. No HOA letterhead this time, no official seal, just a single handwritten line. Some people will never belong anywhere. No name, no return address. But I didn't need one. Clarissa's bitterness had a signature all its own. I tucked it away without a second thought. There was no rage in me anymore, no fear. Something had shifted. Clarissa had finally seen consequences, real ones. And not the HOA kind, where your garden gnome gets a warning and your mailbox earns a fine. No, this was legal, this was public, and it was undeniable. She had played her hand too many times, and now the deck was collapsing around her. The HOA board didn't waste time. A few members, emboldened by her stumble, called for an emergency meeting. According to Mr. Lyman, who had apparently become something of a mole for updates, the session was a spectacle. Clarissa showed up wearing oversized sunglasses and a too bright scarf, as though disguising herself would change anyone's opinion of what had happened. But when confronted with her pattern of behavior, she didn't deny it. Instead, she claimed she had acted in the spirit of order and accused the board of being too weak to enforce standards. That didn't go over well. One board member, a quiet woman named Emily, who had once been fined for using the wrong Halloween decorations, stood up and said, "What you did was harassment, not order. We all saw the line. You stomped over it." The room fell silent, and in that silence, Clarissa realized she had no more allies. The vote wasn't even close. She was asked, no, told, to resign. And to save whatever sliver of pride she had left, she agreed. In her resignation email, she cited ongoing health concerns and the need to focus on personal priorities. But nobody believed that. Everyone knew she was forced out. And with Clarissa gone, Brookmere Gardens finally began to breathe. Emily, newly appointed as HOA president, took swift and quiet action. The rule book got trimmed. The absurd regulations that had strangled the neighborhood into submission were eased. Suddenly, children were allowed to draw chalk art on sidewalks. Garden flags popped up in yards. And yes, even a flamingo or two made an appearance. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like it belonged to its people again. And though I no longer lived there, I couldn't help but smile as stories trickled back to me. Mr. Lyman sent a photo of a lemonade stand 2 kids had set up right by the entrance, bright signs and mismatched chairs and all. Would have given Clarissa hives, he wrote. I laughed deeply and freely. It was strange how peace could feel contagious, how freedom once claimed had a way of spilling over fences and gates and rigid bylaws. As for my little haven beyond the Brookmere gates, it flourished. The tomatoes ripened, fat and red under the sun. The birds returned in flocks, as if they sensed the change in energy. My roses bloomed wider. The wind chimes no longer rang with nervous tension, but with joy echoing through the trees. Walter, my old spaniel, dozed peacefully on the porch, unbothered by patrols or reports or imagined feral packs. My property felt like what I'd always wanted it to be, a place where life could unfold naturally, without judgment, without intrusion. And then, one day I saw it. Or rather, I didn't see it. The silver SUV was gone, not just missing for a day or two, completely absent. It no longer rolled past my mailbox like a ghost on a schedule. It no longer idled at the edge of my property line like a surveillance drone. It had vanished. Rumor had it Clarissa had sold her home and moved out of state to live with a distant sister. Time for a fresh start, someone said, someplace where no one knows her name. But I suspect she discovered what happens when power isn't earned, but seized. Eventually, it slips through your fingers no matter how tight the grip. One quiet evening, as the sun began to sink behind the trees and the sky turned that soft gold you only see in the country, Leo came by. He parked under the oak Tom had trimmed months before and walked up the path with 2 slices of pie from a roadside stand. We sat on the porch, eating in comfortable silence for a while, watching the light dance on the brook. Then he said, "You know, I kept thinking we'd have to pull her back from the edge, but she sprinted off it herself." I nodded. Bullies always do eventually. They push and push until there's no one left to push back, and then the fall is theirs alone. Leo looked around the yard, taking in the flowers, the vegetables, the breeze fluttering through the wind chimes. "You did good, Mum. You didn't just win. You made a home." I smiled deeply. It was never about winning. It was about peace. He clinked his fork against my plate. "Well, you've got that now." We sat there until the stars came out, until the crickets sang their night song and the air grew cool, and somewhere in the quiet, between bites of tart apple pie and the gentle rustle of leaves, I realized something. Clarissa hadn't been just a neighbor or an adversary. She had been a mirror, warped and cruel, forcing me to look at everything I'd accepted in the name of order and conformity. Her tyranny had pressed me to the edge, but in fleeing her control, I found my own strength. I had drawn a boundary, planted roots, and watched them grow, and in doing so, I proved something not just to her, but to myself. Freedom isn't just about escaping chains. Sometimes it's about standing still while someone else tries to wrap the chains around you and saying, "No, not here, not ever again." And when they realize they can't tighten the loop, they fade, powerless in the face of someone who finally knows their worth. That's what Clarissa never understood. Power isn't in rules or titles or HOA letterheads. Real power lies in knowing who you are, protecting what you love, and refusing to be diminished by someone else's fear of your independence. So I keep the porch light on, not because I'm watching for intruders, but because I like the way it glows against the wood at twilight. I tend my garden, not out of obligation, but out of joy. And every so often, when the breeze is just right and the roses bloom just wide enough, I think of Clarissa. Not with anger or triumph, but with pity. She built her life around control and lost it the moment she couldn't control me. I, on the other hand, built mine on something she never understood. Peace. And peace, once planted, grows stronger than any HOA.